I was thinking about how to start this topic because I do a lot of speaking engagements on mental health in general and especially with youth. But I thought about a situation that happened just last week with me. So I went to the doctor's and I was just waiting in the waiting room, and there was a lady in there, an older West Indian lady, and she was sitting beside me, and I forget how she started the conversation. I'm always that person that someone just starts talking to you and you're just like, what's going on? So I started talking to her, and she was just asking me, oh, you in school, what are you doing, and all this stuff. So I didn't tell her all of these aspects, but I did tell her that that I'm a registered kinesiologist, so I went through, finished my degree, I became registered. I'm a certified exercise physiologist. But just in giving you guys some overview as to what I do in my day-to-day, I'm also a second-degree black belt in Taekwondo. Thank you. Several years of hard practice. I am a mental health advocate, so I work with or volunteer with Jack.org. I do different speeches to different youth all across Toronto and outside of the GTA talking about mental health. I'm one of the co-chairs for the Toronto Defeat Depression campaign. So I believe this year is one of our biggest years. Logo at the top there. I own Toronto Pulse CPR, so it's a CPR company that I started for myself. And I do different CPR presentations for different size groups. And I've also started Mindfully You, which is a newer project of mine, which I'll sort of explain as I go along. But I do all sorts of different things. And the one main piece that I mentioned to her is that I'm currently doing my master's in clinical psychology. And so, as I was telling her about the different things I'm doing and I've done, she's kind of like, oh, that's so great and everything. And then as soon as I got to, I'm doing my master's in clinical psychology, she's like, psychology? I'm like, yeah. She's like, you mad? Wesley, she's like, are you crazy? Like, why would I get into this thing, right? And it just kind of hit me because it's like, do I have to be a particular way to want to get involved in mental health? What's wrong with mental health, or what's wrong with being involved in the mental health industry that makes people, just a lot of people, and a lot of our people think in extremes, right? So when we think about mental health, typically, and I am guilty of this as well until I was, kind of cultured on the topic, is that we tend to think of the extreme cases of mental health and people who are struggling with their mental health. So I wanted to just show you guys this first stat here. It's 1 in 5 Canadians experience a mental health or addiction problem in any given year. This stat does not say anything about Black individuals, white individuals, Chinese, Mexican, Canadians. It doesn't say anything about adults, children. It just simply says 1 in 5 Canadians experience a mental health problem in any given year. That includes everyone in this room. Whether, like I said, your background, you could be of Black descent, you could be of another racial background, but we will all have either known someone or personally been affected by something to do with mental health or some struggle to do with mental health in our lifetimes. That's what that stat says. And as much as I did come here today to talk specifically about Black mental health, I think it's important to notice that we're not separate from the issue or discussing issues around mental health. We are very much entrenched in that conversation as much as we are separate from that conversation. Okay, so I wanted to show this this sort of little grid here just to kind of give you guys an idea of, we call this a mental health spectrum. It's from Jack.org, one of the organizations, like I said, I work with. And it's to sort of dispel this myth about how mental health sort of works. Because again, we think in extremes, but a lot of us, and many of you in this room, may be on my right side of the screen, which we're in the healthy side of the spectrum. So I'll give an example with our physical health first, and then kind of tie this into your mental health. So has anyone here ever been sick, broken a bone, gone to the doctors, been unwell at some point in your life? Probably everyone, right? So typically as we go along in our day-to-day lives, we're on the healthy side of the spectrum. So, we're thriving, we're all, I hope, in good spirits here today, listening to all the conversations. But let's say we're looking at, you're on let's say a volleyball team, right? So you're doing well, you're playing volleyball, but then maybe because you forgot to set your alarm one day, you panic and you're like, oh snap, because I've done it with Taekwondo. I was just telling my friend the other day, I've gone so far as to take the bus back home because I was late for a practice, and I just I don't want to deal with anything. So I might have shifted out of the healthy side of the spectrum into the stress side of the spectrum. Okay, so these are areas where we can still take care of ourselves. Even when we're having some difficulties, we can still thrive, but we may feel a little bit more of the pressures of life. But let's say I was able to go to that volleyball practice, and while I was practicing, I don't know, I did a spike, and maybe I landed and I twisted my ankle, right? So my ankle's hurting me, and it's swollen, and so I think I need to see someone to kind of address what's going on. So I make an appointment to see a doctor, right? So I'm not in the worst shape, but I do need a little bit of assistance. But perhaps, let's say I go back and I start playing a few weeks later, and then I land on that same ankle, and boom, I broke it this time, right? So obviously it's the level of severity has increased. I need probably immediate help. Maybe someone calls an ambulance, right? We don't use a situation like our physical health to define our entire lives, right? When I was speaking with that woman, I was telling her about some of the things I've done, some of the things I'm working on, and all of that got eradicated in a second as soon as she heard mental health, and she's just like, oh, you must be basically crazy, right? And so when I look at mental health, we also all go through the same thing with our own mental health, each and every one of us. Because one key thing I wanted to impart to you guys here today, because there's so much conversation about mental health. Bell Let's Talk Day just passed, right? So there's all this conversation. We all, each and every one of you, has mental health. Okay, so if you came in here today perhaps thinking that, again, this may not be a subject that really applies to you, every last one of us has mental health, which means that we all can go through this spectrum at any time in our lives. So looking at mental health, we may start out really healthy, right? Today, let me flash back to when I was in school. You start a new program, you're all excited, you got accepted, you got this letter, and you think, oh, my life's gonna start now, I'm gonna meet all these people, and you're happy and healthy. And then, 2 weeks into the course, you realize I haven't been keeping up with the readings. I haven't even opened the book. Maybe I didn't even buy the book. So now you're getting stressed. And then, you wrote your first midterm, and you're like, okay, I failed. I didn't think I was going to come to school to start failing. And so now you're actually really worried about what's going on. And maybe you go to your TA or your teacher or one of your colleagues, and you start asking them for support. But then maybe you're like, no, I'm not going to drop this class. And you stay all the way to crisis mode where you failed, and now you got to take the class over again, or you're on academic probation, right? That sounds a little bit more. I saw some people nodding as I was talking. I think we've all kind of been in our own experiences with that if you've been in school. But we all can kind of, I think, at least relate, or we're familiar with that type of tone. But when we think about mental health quite often, again, we're thinking about the extreme cases, which as much as they do happen, it doesn't happen necessarily to everyone, but it is something that we should be aware of. So I wanted to make that distinction because, again, this is something that we all move through at different points in the day. So I may bounce between healthy and stressed. I may be stressed on this stage. I don't think so because you guys are a great crowd. But, and we can change through that spectrum anytime in our lives. Okay, so we bounce through this at different points in our lives and in our day. So just kind of getting familiar with mental health, I threw a lot of this stuff on here, but I just wanted to see what you guys may relate to. And I don't like putting people on the spot, so maybe just internally think about which of these things you've felt at any capacity, even over the last week, or at some point in your life. So some signs and symptoms of people who may be struggling with their mental health, they may show signs of withdrawal. So, you just don't really feel like going out to social events anymore. or seeing a lot of other people, you've lost a lot of interest. Things can happen like where you have increased sensitivity. So maybe, your friends used to joke with you and they maybe used to kind of take little jabs at you, and now you can't take them. Any little thing makes you cry or very upset, right? Sometimes nervousness. So in situations where you've done something 1,000 times, right? Let's say you're cooking for your family and you've done it 1,000 times. Now you've lost all your confidence in things that matter to you and came naturally to you. And other things like, sleep changes or mood changes, right? Now you can't sleep so well at night. You're waking up multiple times. You're having nightmares. You are happy one second and then you're just a drag to be around the next, right? These are different signs and symptoms, especially when they're persistent. So that there's a key differentiator between being stressed and having or struggling with your mental health. So these are where people are experiencing these things, but it's persisting over a longer period of time. We want to take notice of that. How many of you have ever either seen this, someone has said one of these things to you, you've said something like this to someone else? I know I have, right? Or you've seen it somewhere. So these are some common things in the Black community we hear, and a lot of the times the people that these labels are applicable to are people who are actually struggling with their mental health, right? So we had a lovely speaker talk about, males and masculinity. You may have the angry Black man persona, right? You have a very strong persona, or you seem like you're a little bit aggressive and someone takes that as you having a problem, but it could be you actually struggling with your mental health. Family members may say that you seem possessed, like Satan got a hold of you and no one knows what's going on with you, but you're actually struggling inside, right? And we all laugh because we've all heard it. Maybe your parents have said it to you or you've said it to someone, right? These are things that are not uncommon in our communities. Maybe you see somebody who smokes a lot of weed, right? And maybe, yes, some people do it for recreational purposes, but maybe that person is also trying to hide something that's going on that's deeper inside, right? And then one of the, for Black females, you have a bad attitude, right? All you have to do is turn on, I'm not going to name any names of any shows, but all you have to do is turn on reality TV. And every one of us has a bad attitude, and we're confrontational, and there's all these different things. And yes, sometimes these names and these labels go with people who do have some personality flaws, but a lot of times, especially within the Black community, these can be hiding things that are much deeper. Okay, so my main message today is that we need to talk about mental health. And we need to talk about Black mental health, and we need to be comfortable having these conversations. Because when I was doing Taekwondo, you would not believe how many people were so happy to tell you about, I got this injury here, or I took this kick, and I broke my arm, and it took me 6 months to heal, and they're open about, I saw this therapist and this athletic trainer and all that stuff, but we don't want to talk about our own mental health. I've already acknowledged that we already all have it, and so there's just this stigma around it, especially within the Black community, about dealing with this, addressing it, acknowledging that it even exists. One thing you may notice, other than that one stat that I put up, I didn't have any other stats on Black mental health, right? You didn't see me throw anything up there. And I like to look at things from a Canadian perspective, because I'm a Canadian, born and raised in North York, just like some here. I lived and grew up in the Rexdale area. I could not find any significant statistics on Black mental health, or Canadian Black mental health in particular. It doesn't exist. There are studies that are conducted, and it's not to say that there's nothing out there, but a lot of them haven't been verified, peer-reviewed. They haven't been replicated, a lot of these tests, to really speak to the struggles or what the Black mental health, like just that whole picture looks like, right? So this is a huge problem, because in what I did find out through the Ontario health study that was conducted, I believe in about 2016, Black people were one of the highest racial groups to report having struggled or were currently struggling with their mental health. So that doesn't make any sense to me personally, as somebody who's going to be entering this field of psychology, that we report such high numbers of struggling with our mental health, and there is no data, there's nothing to support what it is that we're looking into. We don't have significant research on this topic, right? So if we want to at least get something going here, if we want to start a conversation here, it starts with each and every one of you in this room. A topic that I was particularly interested in is post-secondary mental health, because like I said, mental health doesn't always have to do with somebody having some extreme symptoms. If you are a person who either has personally been subjected to trauma, or you've witnessed it, maybe you have a parent or a mother who went through domestic abuse. Maybe you worked in an environment where you were the only black person and you felt alone and you felt the stresses because your coworkers didn't understand you. Maybe you were the only person of color or of a particular religious group in your classrooms. A lot of these different things, they all impact your mental health. If you are a female and you are a black female, you are at a higher risk of having a problem with your mental health. If you are a black male and you are of a lower socioeconomic status, you are at increased risk of developing some sort of problem with your mental health. I wanted to hear from other people what their experiences are and were, and I thought it was best for any conversation that's being had, whether it's about black individuals or people who are struggling with their mental health, it's key for those individuals to be able to tell their own stories. So I started this sort of scholarship award thing for students to talk about their mental health, post-secondary students in particular. So I had about over 35 stories from students across Canada. So I had submissions from PEI, BC, Alberta, right here in Toronto. And I basically wanted to just paint this picture that mental health, as much as we have our own different individual issues and different stories, that a lot of these stories do intersect. Let's just find out actually what's going on with these individuals. Did they have some of these issues? Did they struggle with their mental health prior to entering the post-secondary sphere? When they got in there, what was it like? How did they navigate that space when they realized that they were struggling? How were they approached when they were struggling? Did anyone approach them? Okay, so my book will be out sometime later this year. I hope you guys look for it, and I believe the name is going to be called Great Waves. I hope that when you guys leave here, you feel a little bit more at ease, that mental health is not something that we need to hide from. It's not something that we need to be ashamed about talking about. I think a lot of the topics that were discussed today encourage people speaking their truth and speaking up. So I want you guys to just think, when you've noticed any kind of changes in someone who you love or you are around, just even letting them know that you've noticed changes. That could be a big conversation starter, or that little light bulb in their head to let them know that, that you're noticing them, you see them, and you see that they're hurting. Show care and concern if you think that someone may be struggling with their mental health. It may not be overtly obvious, but if there's anything in you or anything that you're seeing that tells you that, someone may be struggling, let them know that you care about them. You also want to listen and not judge. So everyone's very opinionated. Everybody has an opinion, just like everyone has mental health. That doesn't mean that you need to give your opinion as to what they need to do, right? When I had my flu the other day, the amount of things people told me that I should do to feel better quicker was ridiculous. I didn't necessarily need to hear all of that, right? So maybe just listening and getting that feedback from someone could be something that will really help them. Asking them about what they're struggling with and getting them to reflect on what they're saying. I always tell people, make a list of things from A to Z of what you like doing. So, someone, for instance, a letter N may be a nap to someone. Maybe they're having the time of their life by doing that. For me, N is Netflix. So if I'm not feeling so great, I will go and watch Black Mirror, which is a very good show you guys need to watch, okay? Talk to someone who you trust about what's going on, right? If you have a good friend, family member, someone in the community that you can reach out to, you want to talk to them and see if there's anything that they can offer you or any supports or advice. And ask for help. That is one of the hardest things to do at any stage in your life, in any area of your life. We don't like to acknowledge that we're struggling. How many of you guys have fallen on ice outside in the middle of winter? And someone has seen you fall, right? And what's the first thing you say when they ask you if you're okay? Right? You're holding your backside and you're like, yeah, I'm good. And you could have broke your hip, right? You could have actually hurt yourself. But we don't like to acknowledge when we need help. But asking for help is not a bad thing. It's something that we want to actually encourage, because you may need that support, and sometimes we can't draw it from within ourselves. Within the Black community, we want to try to encourage, or at least I want to try to encourage you to think about mental health, think about supports you can access. A lot of people, especially within racialized communities, feel more comfortable seeking help within their own community. And it can also be a tough thing to find. We all have a voice. I think this whole forum, it's called Black Voices, no? Right? It's about the fact that I think at least everyone in this room, we have a voice and we have something to say, right? I don't know if all the speakers have been speaking for very long. I don't know how many of them have done this as a career, or this was their first time. I don't know how many of you have something to say and you're like, maybe next year, maybe another time I want to get up there and say something. But maybe personally, just within your own families and your own relationships, you may have a voice and you may have an opinion. By sharing our stories, we can all make a ripple that can create a great wave of change. We each can add the little drop to creating the collective of change. The reason why the civil rights movement was so impactful wasn't just because Martin Luther King or Malcolm X had something to say or that they led a march. It's because we all got involved. People within our communities, people outside of our communities. And so we all have our different roles to play in creating change. And I hope that at the very least, when you guys leave here, the role that you can at the very least play within mental health is talking about Black mental health and saying that it's okay to talk about it, because we all have it. Thank you guys.